We were at home. We're in the bedroom at night. Betty was in the bathroom brushing her teeth. I was taking my socks off. And all of a sudden, there was a loud whirring noise right over the top of the house. And I rushed over to Betty to put my hands on the door sill. And next thing I know, we both started being pulled up.
Oh, wow.
Literally right through the roof, the material of the house. And color started fading out of us as we got up. And once we got up to the top, she was pulled off to one side, and I was pulled off to the other.
Revolution Radio proudly presents, live from the heart of the Blue Ridge, Roanoke, Virginia. It's the Just Bernard Show with host Bernard Alvarez. Join Bernard as he shares topics that reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience, including world liberty, the esoteric, suppressed technologies, spiritual ascension, and human consciousness. Humanity has awakened, and our time has come to realize our full potential. And now, live from the Star City, your host, Bernard Alvarez.
I've been looking forward to this talk all week, actually. So let's get the ball rolling. And let me just ask you, let's start at the beginning. It's very interesting. As I did some research, I vaguely remembered seeing that book cover in the bookstores when I was growing up, the Andreasson Affair. But Betty, why don't you tell us a little bit of your first encounters? When did this all start?
Well, it all started in Leominster, Massachusetts. I was about 6 or 7 years old, and I was out in a little hut that my brother had made in the yard, and all of a sudden, I was waiting at first for my friend across the street, Dee Dee, to come over and play dolls, and I had a cracker. I was eating a cracker. It was around noon, and all of a sudden, it started to. I started to have a problem.
It was a thing flying.
Yeah, the thing came in. It was flying around my head and everything. It was bright white light, and I thought it was a bumblebee at first because I was eating the cracker. So I threw that down, and it kept flying around me, and it finally landed right on the middle of my forehead, between my eyes and my forehead, and I went down from it. What they said was the beings that were involved with this BB-like device said the wee little one is coming along fine, and it's difficult to go way back because now at 80 years old I'm starting to lose a lot of the memory.
Oh, jeez.
So Bob is going to help me a little bit with
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah.
You know, that actually was the end of the first meeting at
Experience.
7 years old.
Right.
Right. Then after that, it was 1950, I believe, when you were 13, when you were taken again up in a big moon-like.
Yes. That's right. It was a moonlight craft, and I was taken aboard it. Again, I'm having a problem with my memory. It's terrible. I mean, I went through so many things. It's just that at this age, I'm starting to forget things.
Okay. Yeah, well, I'm only 50 and I'm forgetting things, so I can imagine.
Wait till you get about 80. You'll see what I'm talking about.
So is it fair to say that you've had multiple occasions where they've actually taken you physically? Or was it out of body that they took you, or did they take your physical body?
Oh, both. I've had them both that way. They've taken me out physically and then out of body.
During the 1950 experience, during an examination, they actually removed her eye and put an implant inside the sinus cavity, apparently. And in 1967, when it was removed, that's when the investigators got the idea that she had prior experiences. And the interesting thing is that both Betty and I had our first experiences in 1944. She was 7, I was 5. And then we both had major experiences again in 1967. And both were taken together again in 1978.
Wow.
And some of the things we were told in 1978, I was taken with these big, tall white beings called the elders. Betty was taken to another side of this huge craft, and this was an out-of-body experience. She was involved in what looked like a game, but it was some sort of initiation, where the area where she was with other people, she turned to a golden being of light. She was no longer a physical form. And she could see me. She waved at me from where she was. She saw me with the 2 tall beings, but I didn't recognize her because everybody over where she was looked the same. And those 2 beings took me into another area, and they explained to me that the first thing they made very clear is you do not die. I don't know if you want to call it spirit, soul, the light being within you, that part goes on and on and on and does not die. However, how you live your life here is going to determine your path after you leave here. And something else they made clear was there was a question about evil in the world. And they said evil has to exist on this plane simply because we need choice. And the choices that you make are what's going to determine where you're going later. Another thing they made very clear is that people don't know the importance of animals, and that those that do harm or abuse animals are actually going to pay a price when they leave this realm. I was quite surprised at that, but I never gave it much thought. But animals usually, like especially dogs, give unconditional love. Yeah. And then people that abuse them, I guess are going to get, what they got coming.
Special animal karma.
Yeah. Another thing is that's so much involved with the phenomena that people are not aware of is the environment and big corporations as well as government. And the reason I say this is because we know right now we're having problems with the weather and other things on planet Earth. The fact is there is technology available that has been derived from the UFOs. There's technology available today to clean up this mess. We would not need oil for our cars or gasoline for our cars. We wouldn't need oil to heat our houses. You wouldn't need electricity from the big electric corporations. They are as much or more involved in withholding this information as the government itself. And this is a big problem because we need this technology. And it's being withheld from us. And you know what the environment is today. That's why the government, when Betty and I first went public, one of the things that was in the first book, look back for a minute at Betty and Barney Hill. Betty had that star map that showed that obviously she was in contact with someone that wasn't earthly. Right. In Betty's case, my wife's case, she was told that part of the craft's propulsion system consisted of a tubular circle or donut, if you will, in which liquid mercury was rotated at high speed. Right. Now that was in 1967. That was just passed over. Nobody gave it a thought. But today we have an aircraft called the TR-3B and several offshoots that are actually using this technology today. So there's some confirmation as to the fact that she was involved with someone that wasn't from here. So because of this, Betty and I had to deal with the IRS, the military, the Department of Defense, the FAA. What happened was, once the story came out, we started to get these flights of black helicopters over our home.
Oh, yeah.
And they were unmarked. There were no numbers on these, and they were totally black, usually Huey UH-1s. So we called Ray Fowler, the book's author, and he said, well, you're probably in a flight path. But the flights got so low and so often that one of our neighbors started to document them. Within a year, we moved from that house to another house in Cheshire, Connecticut, and lo and behold, within a week, the flights were over that house.
Mm.
So I started to try to find out who owned these helicopters, and it was next to impossible. I checked with all branches of the military, the FAA, the CIA, the FBI, and I couldn't find who owned them. But I did take a picture of one of those craft, and I sent it to Bell Helicopter in Texas, who manufactures the Hueys. Mr. Dick Tipton, who was their public relations guy, replied. He replied that that helicopter did not leave there in that condition, that it was modified by the military for psychological warfare in Vietnam. So here we are in Connecticut, years later, being monitored somehow by helicopters that were made for psychological warfare.
Oh my gosh.
But Betty and I both have a sense of humor, and so did one of my friends at work. He'd been in the military, and he built me an exact replica of a surface-to-air missile.
Oh my gosh.
So I had flown over our house myself, because I was taking flying lessons at the time to get my pilot's license. I knew what you could see and when you could see it. Well, these helicopters normally approached us from the north. So we set up this fake surface-to-air missile on the south side of the house on a cement pad, and we waited. And eventually along came one of these black Hueys, very low, directly over our yard. Once he cleared the roof and he saw that surface-to-air missile, and this was confirmation that they were watching us, he banked that thing so hard to the right in evasive maneuver. I thought the blades were going to break on it.
Oh my gosh.
Cut to the right, and I told Betty, I said, this fella's headed back where he came from. He's probably going to get a shower and change his underwear.
Oh no.
Oh yeah, that put a good scare into him. But more seriously, when I had contacted the FAA, they told us that what was going on. I had sent them pictures and approximate altitude, compass headings and all, and they said that it sounded like a CIA operation.
Huh.
Well, back then, I called the CIA and requested an interview with them, and we got turned down immediately. They went no explanation, just no interview was granted. So you have to wonder why government was so touchy about this. It was almost like they were afraid to talk to us, because we had the CIA like that. We had the administrator at NASA. Betty and I were down at Cape Canaveral, Cape Kennedy. And while there, we thought, well, it'd be nice if we can interview the administrator. So we went and talked to one of the guards who made a call and said, yes, the administrator's in and he'll talk to you. Well, we didn't tell him who we were. We got down there. It seemed like the guy's office was like a half a mile from where we started. But we got down there, and we were met by his secretary, who was visibly kind of nervous, and she said, well, he's not here. Well, he was here 2 minutes ago, or 5 minutes ago, whatever it took us to get down there. And he literally ran out on us.
Oh, wow.
It makes you wonder why. And back then, I was all angry at the government for this treatment, but corporations are more involved than the government.
Yeah.
If this technology comes out, there goes the oil business, and there goes the elite of the world that control the population through money.
Yeah.
They're all done. And I saw an example of this firsthand that I like to bring out because it's, in my mind, it's proof positive. when Betty and I were living in Florida, I was working as a research technician on hydrogen fuel cells. And this company in West Palm Beach had designed a unit for the home. It was about approximately the size of a refrigerator, had no moving parts, was absolutely silent, and made zero pollution. Now, this thing, you could put it in your house. It would make heat, hot water, and electricity. So obviously a tremendous thing. This would have been a tremendous thing for the environment.
Yeah.
Well, the thing had been tested and retested. We're ready to go in production. They were buying a factory that was nearby, so where we could start manufacturing these. And along come the oil companies. I believe it was ExxonMobil. And within 30 days, there was a meeting at the Ramada Inn. We all got our walking papers, severance pay, and had to sign non-disclosure agreements because the oil companies don't want this thing out in the public.
Oh,
and
yes.
that's just a little example of what's going on today. You know, I never thought I'd get involved in this, but the thing is, back in 1977, I took a ride with a friend of mine. We went around the country looking for work. We had gone down in through Texas and California and Washington State, and we're on our way back home to Connecticut, and we got an idea to go to Florida, which was strange because that's 3,000–4,000 miles out of our way. Well, we went to Florida, and his sister-in-law lived there. One night during supper, her sister-in-law was saying how she worked with this woman that had had a UFO experience. And I thought, wow, that's interesting, because I had one in 1967, and I didn't tell anybody about it except my parents and my best friend, because in 1967 I was a little worried that I'd be getting put in a home that they wouldn't want to let me out.
Yeah, right.
So what happened was that they were telling me about this woman that had a UFO experience, and I said, by God, I'd like to meet her. So I went down, and it turned out the woman, of course, was Betty. And I tried to talk to her where she was working at a restaurant, and she wouldn't talk to me because Ray Fowler told her, don't talk to any reporters.
Oh.
I finally convinced her that I was not a reporter. I made a date with her for lunch the very next day, and I've been buying her lunch ever since that day, actually.
Talk about a match made in the heavens.
Yeah. And you know what was very funny about it, at the time, I was a service manager for a Toyota dealership in Connecticut. Now, I was single. I had a good pay, a great medical plan, a new company car every 3 months. And yet, when my friend asked me to go on that trip, I went to my boss and I said, I need a month off. I want a vacation. So he said, no, he said, I can't give you a month off. He says, 2 weeks, fine. Well, I went home, I thought about it over the weekend. I went in on Monday and I said, Bob, his name was Bob also. I says, I need a month off. I said, either you can give me a month off, you can fire me, or I can quit. I said, but I'm taking a month off. So he finally gave in and decided to give me that time off. And that was very strange because I was a hard worker and conscientious, and I never did anything like that before, but that's what led to me meeting Betty.
Wow.
And then once I met her and she started telling me about her experiences, I thought, wow, this is great. Here's somebody I can talk to that's not going to ridicule me or you know, think I was nuts. So we got together. Now people think we're both nuts sometimes, I guess. I don't know. But,
Well, you're a great spokespeople for people who have experienced it, so that's great.
The reason why we spoke out so much, too, against the government is I believe anyone that has had an experience should not be afraid to come forward with it, should not be fearful of any reprisals from the government or anyone else, really. And I'll get in a minute or two to some of the things that Betty and I experienced with the government. You'll find them hard to believe that our government would do this.
I can't help but feel that maybe some of the information you shared in the book was a little bit too close to home for them, too true. You know?
Probably, because actually, as I said, they are using that Mercury technology today, and that's been stated by people that are historians on air, what we have in the Air Force and so forth. and that's been stated by people who are really in a position where they should know.
Mhm.
So let me ask you a question, because I'm sure our listeners are dying to know. What the beings that you got in contact with, beside the elders, was it only the elders race that you were in contact with? Have you been in contact with the Greys or the Pleiadians, or what are some of the races that perhaps you've contacted with?
The Greys, and the real small beings I've been in contact with. Yeah.
Yeah, and the same with me. It's been the Greys as well as the tall elders, and in Betty's case, she also had experienced the very, very small ones. They look like small children.
Yeah.
Oh, and what were they a specific color? Because my experiences have been with small beings. I'm wondering if they're the same.
They were varied.
Yeah, they were varied.
Some were gray,
shades,
some were whitish, some were brownish. They were the very small ones were varied in their
okay.
Just like human beings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. And when you, I'm curious to know, as far as the crafts, did you notice any differences within the crafts, or were they all basically the same design?
No, there was the first one that Betty experienced was a small saucer-shaped craft, and the first large one that I experienced or the one I experienced in '67 as an adult, was approximately 60 feet in diameter. But in '78, when we were taken together, whatever they took us in was huge.
Oh.
You could have put a football field inside of it. I mean, it was just tremendously large. And there was many people, well, I shouldn't say people, but beings inside there in different areas of that craft as well. But that time we were at home, we're in the bedroom at night. Betty was in the bathroom brushing her teeth. I was taking my socks off, and all of a sudden there was a loud whirring noise right over the top of the house. And I rushed over to Betty to put my hands on the door sill, and next thing I know, we both started being pulled up.
Oh, wow.
Literally right through the roof, the material of the house, and color started fading out of us as we got up. And once we got up to the top, she was pulled off to one side and I was pulled off to the other. That's where she had her initiation or learning experience, and I got talked to by the large beings. And they told me, by the way, the elders said that it was a privilege for me to be there. And I was wondering, why? Well, they said because I was not that spiritually advanced at that time.
Oh.
And they'd also mentioned at other times that one of the problems with mankind is that we're advancing too quick technologically and not fast enough spiritually to keep up. Mm-hmm. That's one of the reasons there's so much discord and disharmony in the world today.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense, and I couldn't agree more with them. Absolutely. Was that your last experience, or when was your last contact experience?
Betty's last one was 1994. We were living in a camp trailer because we didn't really like winter all that much. Mm-hmm. So we were living in Connecticut in the summer for 6 months, and then we were living for 6 months in Florida.
Uh-huh.
So we had a 30-foot camp trailer, and we'd just go back and forth. We did that for about 5 years, plus it made it harder for the government to keep tabs on us.
Right.
Matter of fact, on one occasion, it's in the book, they lost track of us, the FBI did, and they showed up at my work 3 days later wanting to know where I was. They interviewed my coworkers, my supervisor, because we left about 2 o'clock in the morning and they lost track of us. So they had no clue. But anyway, what happened to Betty at this time, the beings came actually into the camper, and we were expecting company, Betty's daughter and grandchildren. So she had just gone through the place and cleaned everything and washed all the mirrors and all. And in the morning, she knew she had had this experience, some experience during the evening it happened. And on one of the mirrors on a closet door, there was a 3-fingered handprint that was not there the day before. So she tried several ways to get it off. We tried to get a hold of some investigators, and unfortunately, Larry Fawcett was on vacation. Ray was somewhere off in Maine. So she finally took and sprayed it with charcoal powder, and then pressed that sticky paper against it, the kind you use to seal your documents and stuff. And it actually has an actual handprint left by one of the beings the night before.
3 fingers.
Yeah, a 3-fingered handprint. But again, at this time, she was taken. Oh.
Hold on, hold that thought, Bob. We've got a commercial break, and we'll be right back. Remember where you left off. We're looking at the handprint when we return.
And now, back to your host, Bernard Alvarez.
And welcome back to the Just Bernard Show here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We are the #1 listener-supported radio network in the world. So if you would like to support the shows on Revolution Radio, please go to freedomslips.com and make a donation. Today we are speaking with Bob and Betty Luca, and they have a new book that's just come out. We're going to talk more about that in just a moment, but before the break, we were Bob was telling us the story of them in the camper, and I believe we left off where you were talking about putting that sticky stuff on the handprint. So welcome back to the show, and if you remember where you left off, we can finish the story for us.
Yeah, when that 3-fingered handprint appeared on the mirror, Bob wanted to put me under hypnosis to see what else happened, because I didn't recall. When he did put me under, what was it that?
That's when you were drawn through the doorway?
Right, I went over to the closet and looked at the mirror. It was bright light there, and I put my hand through the mirror, and suddenly I was in another area, and it was very bright there.
Beings?
Yeah. Go ahead, honey. My memories are...
Well, after she had
I'm sorry.
Put her hand on the mirror and went through it, literally, and this sounds very strange, but it happened. So she was taken into another area with these beings, and again experienced a number of different things with them. That information was imparted to her, and then she was brought back, and the next day that handprint was on the trailer. And I don't remember all the details myself, but that's just one of the many things that had happened. It didn't matter where we lived or what we were living in, these things showed up. Also, wherever we lived or wherever we were, the government showed up as well. So it made life, well, not really difficult, but it was kind of like we're always on guard, because you never knew what these people were going to do.
Mm-hmm. Now, is that why you wrote this new book, A Lifting of the Veil?
Well, yeah, because, you know, as I said, we had the IRS, when the first book came out, we got 3 or 4 audits in a row, and it was pure harassment. They failed. They told me they would not accept canceled checks as proof of payment for things like water and sewer taxes. They didn't accept my bank statements. I had to go to the bank for where I had savings and mortgages to get signed statements from officials at the bank. I had to get signed statements from the city that the taxes, water, sewer, and all that had been paid. And we had a CPA then that we literally got into shouting matches with the auditor. And he said, this is pure and simple harassment. Of course, the IRS says, well, we don't do that. But later on, I was at the last audit on my own, and they wanted me to produce documents that were 12 years old. And I'm sorry, 7 years old. And I refused. I said, I don't have to do that, because they were just over the time period. And they said, well, if you won't give us these documents, we can get them from your ex-wife. Well, at the time, her and I didn't get along too well, so I told them, I said, well, you want to get busy now, don't you? So she got audited. A friend at work was mailing out a lot of mail for me because all the mail that we got, especially from out of the country, was opened. And I went to the postmaster and I asked why, and they said it was the postal inspectors were doing it, and that there's nothing that the postmaster could do about it. So I had a friend at work who was mailing a lot of mail out for me, and the next year he got audited. So that was a payback for that. And then when we moved into the new house in Cheshire, Connecticut, Betty and I were at the closing, and the two girls, Bonnie and Cindy, well, we had already enrolled in school in Cheshire, so we told them, when you're done, come to the new house. It was close enough that they could walk. Well, when they got to the house, someone was inside, and the house was open. Now, Betty and I didn't have a key yet. We were still at the closing, and the house was left locked. They said it was a telephone company, but apparently whoever it was had put a bug in the house because they knew everything we were doing. For example, we were doing some private lectures in Connecticut. One was with a psychologist, and Betty had just finished her part, and I started to talk on the helicopters, and I no sooner started to talk, and here comes one of these helicopters over the house. There was about 20 witnesses, and very low and very slow did a circle around this house. So they knew we were there, but you could say, well, that's coincidence. However, a few weeks later, we were in New Britain, Connecticut, doing the same type of lecture for a dentist and his friends or associates. The same thing happened. Then once again, we were doing a lecture for a contractor in Meriden, Connecticut, and the same thing happened again. As soon as I started to talk about the helicopters, they showed up. Huh. So whatever technology they had, they knew where we were and when we were there, and even what we were talking about. In another instance, I was in a sporting goods store in Connecticut, and I was buying a firearm. Betty was outside in the car, and this large black helicopter came and literally stopped over the store and hovered there until just before I came out, it left. Fortunately, there was a person across the street that had worked for the local newspaper, and he had witnessed it, and he came over and verified that with Betty, but he didn't want his name used. He didn't want to get involved, and you can see why.
Yes, of course.
There's just been so much nonsense with this right from the beginning. You know, a lot of people have talked about Roswell, but what they haven't said is a couple of things. One, everyone since Betty and Barney Hill, my wife and I, Herbert Sherman, a police officer, Lonnie Zamora, we have all been victims of the policy that was put in place after Roswell.
Right.
Now, the government said that Roswell was a mogul balloon.
Right.
Well, that is nonsense, and I'll tell you why. I did some research on this. First of all, the balloon trains were designed by New York University. They got the contract from the Army Air Force to do the balloon trains. The balloon trains were made to be stable at 30 to 40,000 feet of altitude, so they could listen to see if the Russians were detonating any nuclear bombs. Right. When this thing came down at Roswell, whatever it is, you would have to assume that Jesse Marcel didn't know what balloons were made of, didn't know what balsa wood is, and the sonar buoy that actually recorded the sound had an aluminum frame that carried an array of vacuum tubes, wires, condensers, and so forth. So you would have to assume that Jesse Marcel, being in the most elite military group in the world, didn't know what these simple things were. But that's not exactly enough, because in my research, what I found is that the Army Air Force did not want to be associated with these things when they came down, so all equipment found had return to tags identifying New York University as a responsible agency. And you put that together with the fact that June Crane, who was a secretary at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base with a high security clearance, before she died, gave a 2-hour recorded statement saying that what came in from Roswell was an alien craft, that she actually had a chance to see and touch some of the pieces that were brought in at that time. So when they say it's a mogul balloon that crashed at Roswell, that is just pure nonsense.
Yeah. I'm sure by now people don't even take that seriously anymore.
No, you can't. But as I was saying too before, because of after that, what the government put in place was denial, ridicule, and intimidation.
Yeah. And
Betty and Barney Hill had their phone tapped from Pease Air Force Base. Stories were spread about them, perpetrating a hoax and all that. Betty and I had years of government surveillance, and actually in the book, the new book, you will see a document from the FBI admitting that they did have us under surveillance.
Oh, wow.
It took me years to get that out of them. Another thing was our computer, my home computer was hacked by the Department of Defense twice in 48 hours. And in the book, you'll see a letter of admission on that as well. But the interesting thing is, people are going to be very surprised when they see what entities within the Department of Defense were responsible for hacking into the computer. Oh. And then to go on from there, Herbert Schirmer reported a UFO. He was a police officer. He wrote it up in his report. They told him not to. He lost his job. He lost his wife. He lost his house.
Yeah.
That's because of the government policies. Lonnie Zamora, a highly credible state trooper in New Mexico, had a sighting of a UFO on the ground with 2 occupants. The sighting was investigated by the FBI, by the Air Force, by the civilian UFO groups. He was so harassed by this that he gave up his job as a state trooper and ended up managing a gas station. Then you have Vicki Landrum and Betty Cash. Are you familiar with their case where they had radiation burns?
Vaguely, but please go into a little more detail.
Okay. They sighted a craft. They're driving along a highway in Texas, and they sighted a craft hovering above the road and low and spewing fire. So they stopped before they went under it. And Betty Cash got out of the car to look at this thing, and it was intense heat. So it was so hot that when she went to get back in the car, she actually burned her hand on the door handle. Well, finally, 23 Chinook helicopters showed up. Now, the only ones operating that many Chinook helicopters are pretty much the federal government. And these ladies and their grandson, who was in the car, suffered terrible radiation burns, hair falling out, patches of skin falling out, nausea, vomiting, years of medical care. The government would not pay for one thing. They would not admit any involvement. And thanks to reporter George Knapp in Las Vegas, he found out that these helicopters, at least in that case, are being flown by a very special Army elite group known as the Night Stalkers that are stationed out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Of course, they have helicopters all over the country, but that's where they're stationed out of, and they are believed to be involved in a lot of these things. I don't know if they're the ones that were harassing us or not, but it's good to know that finally you can put a name and a label at least on one group or organization that's been responsible.
Yeah.
Now, some of the other things that we went through, and this is really bad. You wouldn't expect it in this country. We were asleep in our home in Cheshire, and I woke up about sometime after 2, I guess. I think we went to bed around 11, maybe it was around 2 o'clock or so, and I heard 2 men talking in our kitchen, and the kitchen was off to the right, off the bedroom. Well, I looked to the bottom of the bed. We had a large Belgian Shepherd. He weighed about 90, 95 pounds. The poor dog got up, and his front paws slid out from under him, and he fell right on his face. So I thought, oh, this can't be good. I reached in my nightstand to grab a pistol, and the next thing I know, it's morning, I woke up with a terrible headache. I mean, wow, very bad, like a terrible hangover. Betty woke up. She said she had a miserable headache as well. So we both finally got dressed and went off to our respective jobs. Well, when we came home, Betty said that her left arm had been hurting her all day. And I said, gee, that's strange because my right arm had been hurting me all day. And she's right-handed, I'm left-handed. So we took our shirts off, and both of us, right on the arm where you normally would receive a vaccination, there was about an inch and a half diameter, an inch and a quarter diameter black and blue mark with a puncture mark right in the center. So I checked with our family doctor and asked if we had gone to the hospital, could they have detected what was put in us? And he said no, by that time it probably would have been too late. But no, that left Betty and I in a bad way because we couldn't really call the police because, you know, they knew we were involved in the UFO phenomena locally. What am I going to say? Men broke in the house and they drugged us.
Right.
And I don't know what they wanted, if they questioned us under that drug or if we were in possession of something that they wanted. But I mean, that's government tax dollars at work.
Oh,
and that should never happen in this country. Because the attitude we had, if anyone from government had come to us and said, you know, what did you see, what did you experience, we would have told them.
Right, of course.
No, today, nothing. And
well, that's just the mess and the attitude that they use, the philosophy. Well, like you said, you know, the three tactics: ridicule and etc.
Right.
We're running out of time. Unfortunately, this went by very, very quickly, and I really wanted to ask you before we go. What do you believe? First of all, were all of these beings benevolent or malevolent, and what was their message? What's the main message you got, and their feeling toward mankind?
Well, they told Betty they're definitely benevolent. And they told Betty that they love mankind, they want to help mankind, but the way we're going, it's going to be better to lose some and save a few. So if that's correct, it's not looking too good for us. And if you read the paper every day, you know, things aren't looking too good.
Right, right. And I'm wondering, you had mentioned something about, I forgot whether it was like a prophecy or something they told you that was coming that couldn't be stopped. Is that what you're making reference to, or is it something else?
Oh no, that was when Betty's sons were killed in a car accident.
Oh, okay.
She did receive an advance warning, but they said that they could not stop it.
Oh my gosh.
We didn't know what the warning was, but we did go up and meet with Ray Fowler that week, and he recorded, documented everything, and that happened just before the two boys were killed in a car accident.
Oh, jeez.
So they couldn't stop it, but at least, you know, they gave Betty a warning that something like that was going to happen.
Yeah, a little preparation.
Yeah, so it's too bad they couldn't have stopped it.
Yeah, of course. And I can't help but wonder, you know, you're making me think of many of the contactees say, and actually I got the same message, that they cannot interfere with our free will, so they're basically letting us screw everything up until we figure it out, that we are the ones that need to save the planet. They're not coming. Have they given you anything like that? Any message like that?
Absolutely, I agree that they cannot interfere, and mankind has got to open their eyes. The first thing we need to do is realize that the people that are, well, let's say, controlling what happens to all of us, we need to change the system. We're letting people put chemicals in our food that cause cancer. They've polluted the ground, they've polluted the air. Science has given us Chernobyl, Fukushima. People are going to wise up and open their eyes, and we're going to have to start fighting against this. And it's not going to be easy because these people that are controlling the money want to do most of us in and have the world for themselves, if you believe a lot of what you hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as far as your understanding or any of the communication that you've had with any of these beings, are there any of these beings here living with us, among us?
You know, I have seen what I think might be, but I can't swear to it because I don't want to put my name on anything that I can't be
Right, of
100%
course.
certain of. From what I've seen from other researchers, highly credible people and all, I believe that's probably so.
Yeah, I'm very interested about the whole under ocean UFOs that we see coming out of the water. If there's, something going on under the ocean that we don't know about.
Well, that's a good place to hide. I mean, we haven't explored very much of it, and obviously their machines aren't bothered by the depths or anything else or the speeds. Some reports from the Russian Navy that have been released report these things traveling along at tremendous speeds under the water, speeds that we can't even think of yet.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very interesting how recently, I don't know if you've noticed, there's been like a little bit of a spike in sightings. I believe it was about 2 or 3 weeks ago. There was a mass sighting. I forgot whether it was Arizona, but it was very recent, and I believe like a whole town saw it and recorded it. It was very interesting.
Well, if what we've been told by some other researchers and whatnot, these should continue to increase. At least that's the word that we've been hearing. So I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I will say that prior to you both coming on the show today, I had posted a question on my Facebook page leading up to the show, asking people if they have had a sighting, and I've got to say it's got to be maybe 90% say that they have had a sighting. So it's very interesting that at this time, more and more of this is coming out, and I can't help but feel, there's discussion happening on the page right now while we're doing this show about disclosure and what's disclosure going to look like. And I keep saying I don't expect the government to do the disclosure. I believe it's going to be us, those of us who have had the contact and just speaking up.
Exactly, because government is not going to disclose simply because people in power now will lose that power if they disclose everything. I don't think government cares if we know there's aliens. I think they're very concerned if we find out about the technology that's available to clean up the messes that man has made without supporting the oil companies and the coal companies and the power companies and all. Because once free energy is available, all those people are going to go they're going to go away. Their money,
Yeah.
their power is gone.
Yeah, they got to figure out a way to make profit off of it before they release it, unfortunately.
Sure, look what they did to Tesla.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, unfortunately, we've got about a minute left, and I wanted to ask you, where can people find the new book?
On Amazon.com.
Oh, okay, good. And your website is the Andreasson Affair, AndreassonAFFAIR.com. If anybody would like to get more information. And is there any last thing that you would like to make sure people get to hear before we go?
Well, I would hope that people would not be afraid to speak out and that the people would stick together and stop all this nonsense about anger and hate and get together and try to work toward making this a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. That's extremely important. I couldn't agree more. Well, I want to thank you both. It's been such a pleasure and such a joy to talk to both of you, and I'm very grateful that you've been doing this work. I mean, we're talking decades now. You've been trying to share this information, and we couldn't be more grateful that you were with us here today. So I thank you very, very much.